The early 1980s were a strange, transitional time for music in America. Disco-influenced pop hits flooded clubs all over, with catchy drums, synthesizers, and overdramatic vocals with lyrics that often didn't say anything profound. The poster child for pop songs at the time was Sweet Dreams by the Eurythmics, which incorporated all those elements to a T. It's a good representation of the club-heavy pop music scene in the 80s. In general, the early 80s served as a transition period into the more synthesized, polished sound of pop music. The dominance of MTV-driven visual culture and the rise of new genres like new wave, glam metal, and hip-hop left little room for more traditional genres like blues in the mainstream. Blues music was once a dominant force in the 50s and 60s, but by the late 70s, blues music was in decline in popularity and was struggling to find a place in mainstream music. Partly due to British blues boom guitarists like Eric Clapton, Peter Green, or even Jimmy Page moving away from traditional blues sounds, ultimately leaving blues to fizzle out in favor of other emerging genres like rock and roll and even early metal music. The big names of blues like B.B. King, Muddy Waters, and Buddy Guy were still active, but were no longer at the forefront of popular music. Blues had essentially become known as an old man genre and was in danger of becoming a relic. This left a void that needed to be filled, and the stage was set for a young, energetic blues guitarist to revitalize the genre. Enter Stevie Ray Vaughan. Despite having been in the music scene for over 10 years, and Double Trouble being active since 1978, Stevie still somehow seemed to have came out of nowhere when he came into the mainstream music scene in 1983. He spent the early 80s playing a live show circuit with Double Trouble, but the Montreux Jazz Festival in 1982 served as the launch pad for his mainstream run, as his performance got the attention of Jackson Browne, and perhaps more importantly, David Bowie, who later invited him to play on the album Let's Dance, where Stevie's lead guitar is heard on 6 of the 8 tracks. Playing through the live show circuit and the Montreux Jazz Festival, combined with his imminent collaboration with David Bowie, set the stage for SRV to hit the mainstream. And at this point, he didn't even have an album to his name, not until 1983's Texas Flood, which was set to release a few months after David Bowie's Let's Dance. Sure, he had cultivated a fantastic career launchpad, and he was obviously an extremely gifted guitarist. But was that really all it took to bring blues back? The right strategy? The perfect storm of collaborations? Just being a great guitar player? Not exactly. What also played a major factor in his rise to the mainstream was, of course, his incredible talent, which grabbed people's attention, and his style and energy kept people hooked. He was such a unique talent that people couldn't help but pay attention to the music he was making. His debut album Texas Flood peaked at 38 on the Billboard 200, which is very high considering the genre and all the incredible music coming out around that time. For reference, some of the top albums at the time were Michael Jackson's Thriller, Prince's 1999, David Bowie's Let's Dance, and Synchronicity by the Police. So, some pretty elite company to be among. And this speaks to just how impactful his music was, and how blues all of a sudden was among the biggest pop albums not just of 1983, but of all time. Perhaps the best way to summarize why Stevie was able to recapture blues audiences is through his innovative style and loose technique, which caught the attention of the younger crowds, and he was able to stay within the boundaries of traditional blues enough to bring in the older crowds. This was the synergy and balance that allowed him to quickly rise into the mainstream and revitalize blues music. His later collaborations with artists like Albert King, Buddy Guy, and others brought traditional blues artists back, and inspired a new generation that carried the torch into the 90s and beyond. The reason Stevie Ray Vaughan's role in this is so significant is because not often are music movements, like the blues revival of the 1980s, attributed to one person. That's what makes this so incredible. Because SRV was synonymous with bringing back an almost dead genre into the mainstream, and back into the musical vocabulary of some of music's most legendary guitarists. So if you ever wondered why Stevie Ray Vaughan was such an important figure in blues guitar playing and why he's such a legend, just look to this revival of music, where he brought the blues back from near death into car radios and on MTV. This was Stevie's main mark in music history, and it's what cements his legacy as a blues guitar legend.